The coffee maker gurgled like a struggling machine at 6:15 a.m., which was about how I felt watching my wife Melissa glide around our kitchen in her power suit, checking her phone with the focus of a surgeon reviewing x-rays. She looked perfect, as always, blonde hair pulled back in that executive bun, makeup applied with military precision, heels that could double as weapons. "Big day today, honey," she said without looking up from her screen, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver news that would ruin my week. "The promotion announcement is this afternoon." I nodded, sipping my coffee, and trying not to think about how many times I'd heard those words over the past 3 months. The promotion, the golden ticket, the thing that was supposed to change everything for us, or more specifically, for me. See, here's the thing about working for your wife's company. Everyone assumes you got your job through nepotism, even when you've been busting your ass in maintenance for 8 years, keeping their fancy office building from falling apart while they play corporate politics upstairs. Ben Harper, the guy who fixes things, the invisible man with the tool belt. "You nervous?" Melissa asked, finally glancing at me with those ice-blue eyes that used to make my heart skip. Now they just made me feel like I was being evaluated for defects. "Should I be?" She smiled, the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. "Of course not. You've worked so hard for this." "Right. Worked hard. Like the time I stayed until midnight fixing the HVAC system during their big client presentation. Or when I personally rewired the entire 3rd floor over a weekend so Rachel Price in HR wouldn't have to work by candlelight. Rachel, who happened to be Melissa's best friend since college. Rachel, who also happened to be going for the same promotion I was. But hey, I'm sure that was just a coincidence. Melissa grabbed her briefcase and planted a kiss on my cheek, cold, efficient, like she was checking off a box on her morning routine. "See you at the office, sweetie. Today's going to change everything." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She was right about that part, at least. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking lot of Sinclair Associates, the mid-sized consulting firm where I'd spent the better part of a decade keeping the lights on while people in expensive suits took credit for my work. The building was one of those modern glass and steel monstrosities that looked impressive from the outside but leaked like a sieve when it rained. I knew every pipe, every wire, every structural flaw in the place. I was probably the only person in the building who actually understood how it worked. The irony wasn't lost on me. I parked my beat-up Ford pickup between a BMW and a Mercedes, feeling like the ugly stepchild at a beauty pageant. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the usual morning energy, people in suits rushing to elevators, clutching coffee cups like lifelines, everyone looking important and stressed and slightly constipated. "Morning, Ben," called out Kat Morrison from the reception desk. Kat was one of the few people in the building who actually treated me like a human being instead of a piece of office equipment. She was also the unofficial gossip central of the entire company, which made her either my best friend or my worst enemy, depending on the day. "Morning, Kat. How's the rumor mill running today?" She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Oh, you know, same old drama. Rachel's been in Melissa's office all morning. Something about the big announcement." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. "Yeah? Well, I'm sure it'll all work out." "I'm sure it will," Kat said, but something in her tone made me wonder if she knew something I didn't. I made my way to the maintenance office in the basement, a cramped space that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. My kingdom. The place where I'd spent countless hours fixing problems that the people upstairs created but never acknowledged. At exactly 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Conference room B, now." This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I straightened my shirt, the nicest one I owned, which wasn't saying much, and headed upstairs. Conference Room B was one of those sterile corporate spaces with a long table, uncomfortable chairs, and motivational posters that made you want to set things on fire. Melissa was already there, along with Rachel and a guy I didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Ben," Melissa said, her voice crisp and professional. "Thanks for joining us. I'd like you to meet Ryan Sinclair, our new executive vice president." Ryan stood up and extended his hand with the kind of smile that screamed, "I went to Harvard and my daddy owns a yacht." "Ben, right? I've heard so much about you." I shook his hand, noting the softness of his palm, the expensive watch, the way he looked at me like I was something he'd found stuck to his shoe. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely. Melissa tells me you're the backbone of this operation." The backbone. Not the brain, not the heart, the backbone. The thing that holds everything up but never gets noticed unless it breaks. "So," I said, settling into a chair across from them, "I'm guessing this is about the promotion?" Melissa exchanged a glance with Rachel, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Yes, it is. Ben, I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for this company. Your dedication, your work ethic, your reliability." Reliability. The kiss of doom in corporate speak. "However," Melissa continued, and there it was, the word that meant my life was about to get flushed down the toilet. "After careful consideration, we've decided that Rachel is the best fit for the facilities management position." The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning, the same system I'd repaired 6 times in the past year. Rachel was trying to look sympathetic, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Ryan was checking his phone like this whole thing was boring him. And Melissa? Melissa was watching me with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. "I see," I said finally. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. "And what's the reasoning behind that decision?" "Well," Rachel jumped in, her voice sickeningly sweet, "I think my background in human resources gives me a unique perspective on managing facilities and personnel. Plus, I have that MBA from the same online program that gave degrees to my neighbor's golden retriever," I interrupted. "Right. That's very impressive." Rachel's face went red. Ryan looked up from his phone with sudden interest, like he was hoping for a show. "Ben," Melissa said sharply, "there's no need to be unprofessional." Unprofessional. That was rich, coming from someone who was currently screwing me over in a conference room. "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up. "Professionalism is very important. Which is why I'm sure you'll understand when I tender my resignation, effective immediately." The silence that followed was beautiful. Rachel's mouth fell open, Ryan's eyebrows shot up, and Melissa looked like I'd just slapped her across the face. "Ben, let's not be hasty," she started. "Oh, I'm not being hasty at all. I'm being professional. Congratulations, Rachel. I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job managing facilities you've never seen and systems you don't understand. I'll clean out my office and be gone by 5. I turned to leave, but Ryan's voice stopped me at the door. "This seems like an overreaction, don't you think? I mean, there will be other opportunities." I looked back at him, this perfectly groomed stranger who'd probably never worked a real day in his life, and smiled. "You know what, Ryan? You're absolutely right. There will be other opportunities, just maybe not the ones you're expecting." I walked out, leaving them sitting there in their expensive suits, probably wondering what the hell just happened. What happened was simple. I'd finally realized that loyalty was a one-way street in this place, and I'd been walking in the wrong direction for 8 years. But as I headed back to my basement kingdom to start packing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The Rusty Anchor was exactly the kind of dive bar where middle-aged men went to drown their sorrows and pretend they still had their dignity intact. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and a bartender named Gus who'd heard every sob story in the book and still managed to pour drinks without rolling his eyes. Well, well, Gus said, as I slumped onto a bar stool that had seen better decades. If it isn't the newly liberated Ben Harper, heard you made quite the exit today. News traveled fast in a town like Millbrook, especially when it involved the wife of someone walking out on her company in spectacular fashion. Just a beer, Gus, whatever's cold. He slid a bottle across the bar and leaned against the counter, studying me with the kind of attention that made me nervous. Gus had been tending bar for 30 years, and he had an uncanny ability to read people like open books. So, want to tell me what really happened, or should I just go with the version where you threw a chair through the conference room window? Nobody threw any chairs, I just quit. Simple as that. Uh-huh. And I suppose it had nothing to do with Rachel getting that promotion you've been gunning for. I took a long pull from my beer, letting the cold liquid wash away some of the bitterness in my mouth. How'd you hear about that? Kat Morrison's sister works at the diner down the street. She heard it from her cousin who cleans offices at your building. You know how it is. Right. The Millbrook gossip network was more efficient than the internet. Look, Ben, Gus continued, polishing a glass with the kind of methodical precision that suggested this was going to be a long conversation. I've known you for what, 15 years? Since you first started dating Melissa? And I've watched you bust your ass for that woman and her company, waiting for them to throw you a bone. Your point? My point is, maybe it's time you stopped waiting for other people to recognize your worth and started making them recognize it. Before I could ask what the hell that meant, the door opened and Tommy Kowalski walked in, still wearing his security uniform from the mall where he worked nights. Tommy was my next-door neighbor, a former cop who'd taken early retirement after a back injury, and one of the few people in town who didn't treat me like Melissa Harper's sidekick. Heard you caused quite a stir today, Tommy said, settling onto the stool next to mine. Gus, get me whatever he's having. Jesus, does everyone in town know already? Pretty much. Mrs. Gagnon saw you come home at 3 p.m. looking like someone had pissed in your cornflakes. She called my wife, who called her sister, who called... Okay, I get it. Tommy accepted his beer from Gus and turned to face me. So what's the plan now? Going to look for another job? Start your own business? Or just sit here feeling sorry for yourself? I haven't really thought that far ahead. Bullshit. You've been thinking about it since the moment you walked out of that conference room. The question is, are you going to do something about it, or just let them win? There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. Tommy had that cop instinct for reading situations, and right now he was reading me like I was a suspect he was trying to crack. What do you mean, let them win? Tommy and Gus exchanged a look that made me distinctly uncomfortable. Ben, Gus said slowly, how much do you actually know about what your wife does when she's working late? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Tommy said, that Melissa's been having a lot of late meetings lately, and some of them seem to involve that new executive, Ryan, what's his name? The beer in my stomach turned to acid. You're full of shit. Am I? Mrs. Gagnon mentioned seeing a Tesla in your driveway last Tuesday night. Expensive car for a social visit. And you were out of town that day, weren't you? That conference in Boston? I stared at him, my brain refusing to process what he was suggesting. You're talking about my wife. Yeah, I am. And I'm talking about a pattern. Late nights, mysterious phone calls, sudden interest in going to the gym at odd hours. Tommy's seen it before, haven't you, Tommy? Tommy nodded grimly. More times than I care to count. Look, Ben, I could be wrong. Maybe there's a perfectly innocent explanation. But if I were you, I'd want to know for sure. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was crazy, that Melissa might be a lot of things, but she wasn't a cheater. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger over the past few months, was remembering all those late nights, all those weekend emergencies, all those times she'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Even if that were true, I said finally, what am I supposed to do about it? Tommy leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You gather evidence, you document everything, and then you make sure that when the dust settles, you're the one left standing. That sounds dangerously close to stalking. It's called protecting yourself. Look, if I'm wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right, he shrugged. Well, let's just say that knowledge is power, and right now, you don't have much of either. I finished my beer in one long gulp, my mind racing. The smart thing would be to go home, have a rational conversation with my wife, and try to work things out like adults. But the smart thing had gotten me exactly nowhere for the past 8 years. Hypothetically, I said, how would someone go about gathering evidence? Gus smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. Now you're asking the right questions. Over the next hour, Tommy laid out what he called basic surveillance techniques, ways to track someone's movements, monitor their communications, and document their activities without breaking any laws. Most of it was stuff I already knew from watching too many crime shows, but hearing it from an ex-cop made it seem more real, more possible. The key, Tommy explained, is to be patient. Don't go in guns blazing. Build your case slowly, methodically, and whatever you do, don't let them know you're on to them. And then what? Confront them? File for divorce? That depends on what you find and what you want to accomplish. There was something in his tone that suggested we weren't just talking about divorce proceedings anymore. What do you mean? Tommy and Gus exchanged another look. Ben, Gus said carefully, how long have you been fixing problems for that company? How many times have you saved their asses when something went wrong? How many secrets do you think you've stumbled across in 8 years of having access to every office, every computer, every filing cabinet in the building? The implication hit me like a freight train. They weren't just talking about catching Melissa cheating, they were talking about something much bigger. I'm not going to break the law, I said quickly. Who said anything about breaking the law? Tommy replied. I'm talking about using information that's already available. Information that you've legitimately come across in the course of your job. Information that certain people might not want to become public knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text message. Melissa. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I showed the message to Tommy and Gus. They both nodded knowingly. Well, Tommy said, looks like you've got some free time tonight. Want to take a little drive? I should have said no. I should have gone home, watched TV, and pretended that my life wasn't falling apart. Instead, I found myself nodding. What the hell? It's not like I have anything else to do. As we left the bar, I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized the man staring back at me. For 8 years, I'd been Ben Harper, the reliable guy, the one who fixed things and kept his head down and never made waves. But that guy had just gotten screwed over by the people he'd trusted most, and maybe it was time for a new version of Ben Harper to make his debut. Tommy's car was a beat-up Honda that blended into traffic like camouflage, which he assured me was exactly the point. We'd been sitting outside Ryan Sinclair's condo complex for 45 minutes, sharing a thermos of coffee that tasted like motor oil and watching the parking garage entrance like a couple of low-rent private investigators. This is insane, I muttered for the 10th time. We're sitting in a car spying on my wife like a couple of teenagers. We're gathering information, Tommy corrected. And if your wife is where she's supposed to be, at the office working late, then we'll go home and you can apologize to her tomorrow for doubting her. And if she's not, then you'll know where you stand. The condo complex was one of those upscale developments that had sprouted around Millbrook like expensive mushrooms, all glass and steel and landscaping that required a team of professionals to maintain. The kind of place where a maintenance guy like me would only visit to fix someone else's problems. There, Tommy said suddenly, pointing toward the garage entrance. Silver Tesla, license plate, can you see it? I squinted through the darkness. The car was too far away to make out the plate, but I recognized the vehicle. I'd seen it in the company parking lot, always taking up 2 spaces like it owned the place. That's his car. Okay, now we wait. For what? For whoever's inside to come out. We waited, and waited. The coffee ran out, my ass went numb from sitting in the cramped Honda, and I started questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. But just as I was about to suggest we call it a night, the elevator doors in the lobby opened. Two figures emerged, walking close together, the woman's blonde hair catching the light from the lobby fixtures. My wife. With Ryan Sinclair. At 11:30 at night. They weren't holding hands, weren't obviously affectionate, but there was something about their body language, the way she leaned toward him, the way he touched her elbow as they walked, that made my stomach clench. Son of a bastard, I whispered. Tommy was already taking pictures with a camera that looked like it belonged to a professional surveillance team. Where'd you get that? I asked. Amazon. Amazing what you can buy these days. We watched as they reached the Tesla. Ryan opened the passenger door for Melissa, a courtesy he'd never shown any other employee, I was sure. They talked for a moment, their heads close together, and then he kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, not a professional goodbye. A real kiss, the kind that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I felt something break inside my chest, a sharp crack like ice splitting on a frozen pond. I'm sorry, Ben, Tommy said quietly. I really hoped I was wrong. The Tesla pulled out of the parking garage and headed toward the main road. Tommy started the Honda and followed at a discreet distance, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to track their movements. Where are they going? Probably taking her back to her car. Or maybe... He trailed off as the Tesla turned into the parking lot of the Millbrook Inn, a renovated historical hotel that catered to business travelers and people having affairs. Jesus Christ. We parked across the street and watched as Ryan and Melissa walked into the lobby together. Through the large windows, we could see them at the registration desk, Ryan's hand resting possessively on the small of my wife's back. How long do you think this has been going on? I asked. Hard to say. But based on what I've observed, I'd guess at least a couple of months, maybe longer. A couple of months. That would put it right around the time Ryan had started at the company, right around the time Melissa had started working late and going to the gym and buying new lingerie that she claimed was just for herself. My phone buzzed, a text from Melissa. Still at the office. This project is wearing me out. Love you. I showed the message to Tommy. He shook his head in disgust. That's cold, even for a cheater. We sat there for another hour, watching the hotel, but neither Ryan nor Melissa emerged. Finally, Tommy started the car. Come on, let's get you home. The ride back was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When Tommy dropped me off at my house, he handed me a business card for a private investigator he knew. Just in case you want to make this official, he said. But honestly, Ben, you've got enough evidence already. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I stood in my driveway, looking at the house I'd shared with Melissa for 12 years, and realized I had no idea who I was married to anymore. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, was apparently someone else entirely. Inside, the house felt different, emptier, colder, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my workshop in the garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my refuge. But tonight, they just reminded me of all the times I'd fixed things for other people while my own life fell apart. My phone rang at 12:30. Melissa. Hey, honey, she said, her voice slightly breathless. Sorry to call so late. I just wanted to let you know I'm finally heading home. Long night at the office? You have no idea. Ryan had me going over these reports until my eyes crossed. I swear, sometimes I think he forgets that other people have lives outside of work. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost admired her skill. Almost. Well, drive safe. I'll probably be asleep by the time you get home. Okay. Love you. Yeah, Love you too. I hung up and stared at the phone, wondering how many other lies I'd swallowed over the past few months. How many times had she looked me in the eye and lied about where she'd been, what she'd been doing, who she'd been with. 20 minutes later, I heard her car in the driveway. I listened as she came through the front door, moving quietly so as not to wake me. Heard her go upstairs, heard the shower running, washing off the evidence of her evening with Ryan, no doubt. When she finally came to bed, she smelled like hotel soap and guilt. "How was your evening?" she whispered, probably thinking I was asleep. "Quiet," I replied. "Just watched TV and worked on some projects in the garage." "That's nice. I'm sorry about today, Ben, about the promotion. I know you're disappointed." Disappointed. Like I'd lost a baseball game instead of having my career and my marriage flushed down the toilet in the same day. "It's fine," I said. "These things happen." She curled up next to me, her body warm against mine, and for a moment I almost forgot what I'd seen tonight. Almost pretended that we were still the couple we used to be, before ambition and betrayal had poisoned everything between us. But then, I remembered the kiss in the parking lot, the way she'd looked at Ryan, the casual cruelty of her lies, and I started planning. Because Tommy was right about one thing: knowledge was power, and now that I knew what I was dealing with, it was time to figure out how to use that power. Melissa fell asleep quickly, probably exhausted from her evening of deception, but I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and thinking about revenge. The next morning, Melissa left for work with the same routine efficiency as always, kissing my cheek and reminding me to call about health insurance since I was no longer employed. She was good. I had to give her that. No trace of guilt, no hint that anything had changed between us. But everything had changed. I just wasn't ready to let her know that yet. After her car disappeared down the street, I called Gus at the bar. "How'd last night go?" he asked without preamble. "About as well as you'd expect. Tommy was right." "Shit. I'm sorry, Ben. What's your next move?" "I need to think. Can you meet me at the Anchor around noon? And maybe ask around about Ryan Sinclair, see what people are saying about him." "Already on it. Kat Morrison's been eager to spill some gossip about the new golden boy. Apparently he's not as perfect as he wants everyone to believe." "Interesting. What kind of not squeaky clean?" "The kind that involves questionable expense reports and a very messy situation at his last job. But I'll let Kat tell you the details. She loves an audience." I spent the morning in my workshop, ostensibly organizing tools, but really just trying to process what I'd learned. 12 years of marriage, and I'd never suspected that Melissa was capable of this level of deception. Either I was incredibly naive, or she was incredibly good at lying. Probably both. At noon, I walked into the rusty Anchor to find Gus, Tommy, and Kat Morrison waiting for me in a corner booth like some kind of conspiracy planning committee. Kat was practically vibrating with excitement, a stack of papers in front of her that looked like printouts from the internet. "Ben!" she called out as I approached. "Gus told me what happened. I am so sorry, honey, but also I have some very interesting information about your wife's new boyfriend." I slid into the booth next to Tommy. "Let's hear it." Kat opened her folder with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Ryan Sinclair, 33, MBA from a decent but not spectacular school, previous employment at Hartwell Consulting in Boston. Officially, he left to pursue new opportunities. Unofficially," she paused for effect. "Unofficially, he was asked to step down after allegations of misconduct and financial mismanagement. Nothing was ever proven and he managed to keep it quiet, but word gets around in the consulting world." "How did you find this out?" "My cousin works in HR at a firm in Boston. She knows people who know people. The harassment thing involved a married woman, his supervisor's wife, actually. Very messy, very expensive to make go away." Tommy leaned forward. "So he has a pattern of going after married women. And a pattern of playing fast and loose with company resources," Kat added. Apparently, he had a habit of billing personal expenses to client accounts. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger an audit, but enough to add up over time. I felt a cold smile spreading across my face. Is he doing the same thing at Sinclair Associates? Well, that's the interesting question, isn't it? Kat said. I mean, I couldn't possibly access expense reports or anything like that. That would be completely inappropriate. She slid a manila envelope across the table. But if someone were to accidentally leave copies of certain documents lying around the office, and if those documents happened to find their way to, say, the company's board of directors. I opened the envelope and found photocopies of expense reports, credit card statements, and travel receipts. Ryan had been busy, expensive dinners charged to the company, hotel rooms that didn't correspond to any business trips, purchases from high-end electronics stores that had nothing to do with consulting work. This is enough to get him fired, I said. Maybe, Tommy replied, but it's also enough to get you in trouble if they figure out where it came from. You need to be smart about this. Gus, who'd been quietly nursing a beer while we talked, finally spoke up. The way I see it, Ben, you've got two separate problems here. You've got a cheating wife, and you've got a company that screwed you over. Maybe it's time to solve both problems at once. What do you mean? I mean, what if Ryan's financial irregularities came to light right around the same time as his inappropriate relationship with a married employee? What if the board started asking questions about whether Melissa knew about his creative accounting? What if they started wondering whether the promotion she gave to her friend Rachel was based on merit or favoritism? The implications were staggering. If I played this right, I could take down not just Ryan, but Melissa and Rachel as well. The three people who'd conspired to destroy my career could find themselves out of jobs, their reputations in ruins, their futures uncertain. That's nuclear, I said. Sometimes nuclear is what the situation calls for, Tommy replied. But you have to be prepared for the fallout. This isn't just about getting revenge. This is about burning bridges and salting the earth behind you. I thought about Melissa lying next to me last night, her body warm with deception. I thought about Rachel's smug satisfaction when she got the promotion that should have been mine. I thought about Ryan's condescending handshake and his expensive suit and his Tesla taking up 2 parking spaces. How do we do it? Kat grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. Leave that to me. I know exactly who to talk to, and more importantly, I know when to talk to them. The board meets next Friday to review quarterly reports. If certain information happened to reach certain people before then, what about Melissa? She's going to know I'm behind this. Not necessarily, Gus said. Corporate whistleblowing happens all the time. Could be anyone. A disgruntled employee, someone in accounting who noticed irregularities, a competitor trying to cause trouble. As long as you keep your mouth shut and act surprised when it all comes out, you should be fine. Tommy nodded. The key is to stay above the fray. Act like you're just as shocked as everyone else. Maybe even express some sympathy for Melissa. After all, she's your wife. She was probably just as deceived as everyone else. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Kat would anonymously leak Ryan's expense reports to the board, along with hints about his inappropriate relationship with Melissa. The board would launch an investigation, which would inevitably uncover more evidence of wrongdoing. Ryan would be fired, Melissa would be implicated, and Rachel, as Melissa's closest ally, would likely get caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, I would play the role of the innocent bystander, the wronged husband who was just as surprised as everyone else to learn about his wife's betrayal. There's one more thing, Tommy said as we prepared to leave. You need to start documenting everything at home. Conversations, behaviors, anything that might be useful if this goes to divorce court. And you need to start protecting your assets. What do you mean? I mean, if Melissa is planning to leave you for Ryan, she's probably already thinking about how to maximize her take in the divorce. You need to be thinking the same way. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy and deception. Melissa went to work, came home, made dinner, and pretended to be the loving wife she'd never actually been. I played the role of the unemployed husband, moping around the house and half-heartedly looking for new jobs. But beneath the surface, I was gathering intelligence. I installed a small recording app on my phone and started documenting our conversations. I made copies of financial documents and stored them in a safety deposit box that Melissa didn't know about. I even set up a hidden camera in the garage to record our interactions. Nothing illegal, just protecting myself in case things got ugly. And every night, I waited for her to slip up, to give me some piece of information I could use. On Thursday night, she did. "I might be working late tomorrow," she said over dinner. "The board meeting is Monday, and Ryan wants to make sure all our reports are perfect." Ryan's pretty demanding, huh? He's thorough. I actually admire that about him. He doesn't cut corners or accept mediocrity. Unlike me, was the clear implication. "Well, I'm sure you'll impress him." She smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. But then I remembered the hotel room, the lies, the casual cruelty of her betrayal, and the moment passed. "I hope so," she said. "This could be a really important opportunity for me." An opportunity. That's what she called it. Not an affair, not a betrayal, not the destruction of our marriage. An opportunity. Friday morning, she left early, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to pick up groceries. Just another day in our fake marriage. But by 5 o'clock that afternoon, her opportunity was about to become a nightmare. Kat had done her job perfectly. The anonymous tip had reached the right people, the evidence had been reviewed, and the board was asking very uncomfortable questions about Ryan Sinclair's expense reports and his relationship with certain employees. I was sitting in the rusty anchor, nursing a beer and waiting for the fireworks to begin, when my phone rang. Melissa. Her voice was tight with panic. "Ben, something terrible has happened at work. Can you come pick me up? My car won't start." Her car was fine, I was sure. But her career was about to explode, and she needed someone to lean on while she figured out how to spin the disaster. "Of course, honey. I'll be right there." Time to play the supportive husband one last time. The Sinclair Associates parking lot looked like a crime scene when I arrived. There were more cars than usual for a Friday evening, including several I didn't recognize, probably board members who'd been called in for an emergency session. Through the windows of the conference room on the 3rd floor, I could see figures moving around, their body language suggesting heated discussions. Melissa was waiting by the front entrance, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "Thank God you're here," she said, practically throwing herself into my arms. "This whole thing is insane. They're accusing Ryan of stealing from the company." "Stealing? That's serious?" "It's not true, of course. I mean, Ryan can be careless with paperwork, but he's not a thief. Someone's obviously trying to sabotage him." I held her close, making sympathetic noises while inside I was cataloging every word. She was defending him, which meant she was in deeper than I'd thought. Good. That would make the fall even harder. "What does this have to do with you?" "They're questioning everyone who worked closely with him, trying to figure out if anyone else was involved." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Ben, they asked me about my relationship with him, like our personal relationship." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That we're colleagues, nothing more. But I don't think they believed me." "The truth. Right." I had to admire her commitment to the lie, even now. "I'm sure it'll be fine," I said. "You haven't done anything wrong." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew she was in trouble, she just didn't know how much trouble yet. We drove home in relative silence, Melissa staring out the window while I pretended to focus on traffic. But my mind was racing, calculating the next moves in this chess game I'd started. "Ben," she said as we pulled into our driveway, "there's something I need to tell you." Here it comes, I thought. The confession. The moment where she breaks down and admits everything, begging for forgiveness and understanding. Ryan and we've become close. Closer than we probably should have. What do you mean? I mean, we've spent a lot of time together working on projects, and sometimes the line between professional and personal gets blurred. Nothing inappropriate has happened, she added quickly, but I can see how it might look bad to the board. Nothing inappropriate, except for the hotel rooms and the lies and the systematic betrayal of our marriage. But who's keeping track? How close are we talking about? We've had dinner a few times, drinks after work. He's been going through a difficult time. His divorce was finalized last month, and I guess I felt sorry for him. His divorce. That was new information. So Ryan was freshly single and looking for his next conquest. How romantic. Melissa, are you having an affair? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. She stared at me, her face cycling through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally, defiance. How can you ask me that? Because my wife is coming home at midnight claiming to work late, because she's defending a man who's apparently been stealing from her company, and because she just admitted to having an inappropriate relationship with him. It's not an affair, Ben. We've never... But her voice trailed off, and I could see the lie fading on her lips. She was realizing that she'd already said too much, revealed too much. We kissed, she said finally. Once. Last week. It was a mistake, and it didn't mean anything. Once. Last week. I thought about all the hotel visits, all the late nights, all the lies I'd documented over the past few months. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to minimize the damage. I see. Ben, please, I know how this looks, but you have to believe me. I love you. I've always loved you. Ryan was he was a distraction, a stupid mistake. A mistake. That's what our marriage had become to her. Something to be managed, minimized, explained away. What happens now? I don't know. The board is conducting a full investigation. Ryan's been suspended pending the outcome. And they're looking into everyone who worked with him. Including you. Including me. We went inside and pretended to have a normal evening. Melissa made dinner while I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the space we'd shared for so many years. She was trying to act normal, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone. Are you going to call him? I asked. Who? Ryan, to see how he's handling all this. She froze, a wooden spoon halfway to her mouth as she tasted the sauce she was making. Why would I call him? Because you care about him. Because you're worried about how this affects him. I care about how this affects me, Ben. How it affects us. If the board decides I was involved in whatever Ryan was doing, were you? Another loaded question. Another moment where she had to decide how much truth she could afford to tell. No. I had no idea about the expense reports or any financial irregularities. I swear to you, Ben, I had no idea. That was probably true. Ryan had been careful to keep his theft separate from his seduction, but it didn't matter. The association alone would be enough to destroy her career. Over the weekend, the story continued to unfold. Kat kept me updated through a series of carefully casual phone calls, filling me in on the latest developments. The board had brought in an outside auditing firm to review Ryan's activities. They'd found evidence of systematic fraud going back months, possibly longer. They'd also uncovered emails and text messages that suggested an inappropriate relationship with at least one employee, though they hadn't named names yet. They're being very careful about the personal stuff, Kat explained during a Sunday afternoon call. Nobody wants a lawsuit, but word is spreading. People are talking. What are they saying? What do you think they're saying? Ryan's the predator who seduced a married woman and stole from the company. Melissa's the victim who got caught up in something she didn't understand. It's very dramatic. Victim. That was rich, but I supposed it was better than being labeled a co-conspirator. Monday morning brought the official announcement. Ryan Sinclair had been terminated for cause, effective immediately. An internal investigation was ongoing, and the company was cooperating fully with law enforcement. Melissa read the email aloud over breakfast, her voice carefully neutral, but I could see her hands shaking as she held her phone. "Well," she said, "I guess that's that. How are you feeling?" "Relieved, mostly. This whole thing has been a nightmare." "And Ryan? Have you heard from him?" "No, and I don't expect to. Whatever we had, it's over now." Whatever they had. Still minimizing, still trying to control the story. But the story was about to get much bigger. That afternoon, while Melissa was at work dealing with the fallout, Tommy came by the house with news. "Ryan's been arrested," he said without preamble. "Fraud, embezzlement, possibly more charges to come. And here's the interesting part. He's claiming that he wasn't acting alone." "What do you mean?" "I mean he's trying to make a deal. Claiming that certain employees were aware of his activities and helped cover them up. He's naming names. Melissa, among others. Look, it's probably bullshit, a desperate man trying to spread the blame around, but it's going to make things very uncomfortable for your wife." Very uncomfortable was an understatement. If Ryan was trying to implicate Melissa in his crimes, she was looking at potential criminal charges, not just the loss of her job. I should have felt sorry for her. Should have felt some sympathy for the woman I'd loved for 15 years. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. She'd made her choices. Now, she could live with the consequences. When Melissa came home that evening, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single day. Her perfect composure was completely gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. "They want me to hire a lawyer," she said, collapsing onto the couch next to me. "Ben, they think I might be charged as an accessory." "To what?" "To Ryan's embezzlement. He's claiming that I knew about it, that I helped him hide it. It's not true, but we spent so much time together, worked so closely on his projects, that it's going to be hard to prove I didn't know what he was doing." The irony was perfect. Her affair with Ryan, the thing that had destroyed our marriage, was now going to destroy her career and possibly her freedom. "What does your lawyer say?" "That I should cooperate fully with the investigation and hope for the best. But Ben, if they charge me, if this goes to trial—" She started crying then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost reached out to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But then I remembered the hotel room, the lies, the casual cruelty of her betrayal. Instead, I sat there and watched her cry, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. The war was almost over, and I was winning. The next few weeks passed like a slow-motion disaster movie. Ryan's arrest made the local news, complete with footage of him being led away in handcuffs and breathless speculation about the scope of his crimes. Sinclair Associates hired a crisis management firm to handle the media attention, but the damage was already done. Their reputation was in ruins, their client base was fleeing, and rumors of a complete shutdown were circulating around town. Melissa had indeed hired a lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman from Boston who specialized in white-collar crime. The legal bills were already mounting, eating into our savings at an alarming rate. But Melissa seemed convinced that if she just cooperated fully with the investigation, everything would work out fine. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I was sitting in the Rusty Anchor on a Thursday afternoon, nursing a beer and listening to Gus hold court about the scandal, when Kat Morrison burst through the door with the kind of excitement that meant someone's life was about to get much worse. "Ben, thank God you're here. You need to hear this." She practically dragged me to a corner booth, her eyes bright with gossip-fueled adrenaline. "Rachel Price just got fired," she announced. "Not laid off, not downsized, fired, for cause." "What cause?" Turns out she was in on it. The whole thing, Ryan's embezzlement, the fraudulent expense reports, all of it. She was helping him hide the money trail through her HR access. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Rachel, smug, self-satisfied Rachel, who'd stolen my promotion, had been a criminal all along. How do you know this? Because I was in the office when security escorted her out. She was screaming about how this was all a misunderstanding, how she was just following orders. It was beautiful. Following whose orders? Kat's smile turned predatory. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because if Rachel was following orders, someone had to be giving them. Someone with enough authority to make her think she was safe. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Rachel had been taking orders, and if she'd been working closely with Ryan, then there was only one person who could have been directing their activities. My wife. They're going to arrest Melissa, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Probably. The FBI is taking over the investigation now. This isn't just about a few fraudulent expense reports anymore. They're talking about organized financial crimes, conspiracy, maybe even money laundering. Money laundering. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. This had gone way beyond a simple affair and some petty theft. Melissa wasn't just looking at losing her job. She was looking at serious federal charges. I should have felt horrified. Should have been planning how to support my wife through the legal nightmare that was about to engulf her. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. She'd made her bed. Now she could lie in it. That evening, Melissa came home looking like a ghost. Her usual perfect appearance had given way to something haggard and desperate. She'd obviously been crying, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. They arrested Rachel, she said without preamble. I heard. What does that mean for you? I don't know. My lawyer thinks... She thinks they might be building a case against me too. Based on what? Based on the fact that I worked closely with both Ryan and Rachel. Based on the fact that I signed off on some of the reports that contained the fraudulent expenses. Based on the fact that I had access to the systems they used to hide the money. She collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. Ben, I swear to you, I had no idea what they were doing. Yes, I was having an affair with Ryan. Yes, I made terrible decisions. But I never stole anything. I never helped them steal anything. An affair. Finally, the truth. Or at least part of it. How long? What? How long were you having an affair with him? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Does it matter now? It matters to me. 3 months, maybe 4. It started right after he joined the company. 4 months of lies. 4 months of betrayal. 4 months of coming home to me every night while she was building a life with someone else. Were you planning to leave me for him? I don't know. Maybe. I thought I was in love with him. Thought. Past tense. Interesting how quickly love died when faced with federal charges. And now? Now I realize what an idiot I've been. Ben, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you. I need your support to get through this. I can't face this alone. She needed me. After months of lies and betrayal, after destroying my career and humiliating me in front of the entire town, she needed me. The irony was delicious. Of course, I said. We'll get through this together. She looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes. Really? After everything I've done? You're my wife, Melissa. For better or worse, right? She started crying again, this time with what looked like relief. She thought I was going to stand by her, support her through the legal battle, help her rebuild her life after the dust settled. She had no idea what was coming next. The FBI arrested Melissa on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., with all the drama and publicity that federal law enforcement could muster. News vans lined our street, neighbors came out to watch the show, and I played the role of the shocked and supportive husband to perfection. I can't believe this is happening, I told the reporters, who shoved microphones in my face. My wife is a good person who made some mistakes. She doesn't deserve this. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and a handful of other federal crimes that carried serious prison time. Her lawyer tried to spin it as a case of a naive woman being manipulated by sophisticated criminals, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed money flowing through accounts that Melissa had access to. Email trails revealed her involvement in covering up suspicious transactions. Witness testimony from other employees painted a picture of someone who was intimately involved in the conspiracy. The media ate it up. Executive's wife charged in million-dollar fraud scheme. Local woman's affair leads to federal charges. The Millbrook scandal: how greed and lust destroyed a company. I played my part perfectly, the loyal husband standing by his disgraced wife. I attended every court hearing, held her hand during arraignments, and gave carefully crafted statements to the press about how we were going to fight these charges together. But behind the scenes, I was working with Tommy and Gus to make sure that every piece of evidence, every damaging detail, every humiliating revelation found its way into the public record. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of the conspiracy, the amount of money involved, and the elaborate lengths that Ryan, Rachel, and Melissa had gone to in order to hide their crimes. Ryan took a plea deal and testified against his former co-conspirators, painting Melissa as the mastermind who had recruited him and Rachel into the scheme. Rachel tried to claim she was just following orders, but the evidence showed she'd been skimming money for herself the entire time. And Melissa? Melissa maintained her innocence right up until the moment the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and betrayal. She'd finally realized that I wasn't the loyal husband she'd thought I was, that I'd been playing a longer game than she'd imagined. But it was too late. After the trial, I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and criminal conduct. With Melissa in prison and facing massive legal debts, I was able to keep the house, the savings, and most of our joint assets. Her lawyer tried to fight it, but it's hard to argue for a fair settlement when your client is wearing an orange jumpsuit. The company folded within 6 months of the scandal breaking. The remaining employees scattered to other jobs. The office building was sold to pay creditors, and the Sinclair Associates name became synonymous with corporate fraud and corruption. I started my own consulting business, specializing in facilities management and corporate security. Turns out that 8 years of fixing other people's problems had given me a unique perspective on how companies actually work and how they fail. Business was good. Very good. Tommy helped me set up the new company, using his law enforcement contacts to build a client base of businesses that wanted to avoid the kind of scandal that had destroyed Sinclair and Associates. Gus provided office space above the bar, and Kat Morrison became my first employee, bringing her talent for information gathering to the legitimate side of the business. We called it Harper Security Solutions. The name felt right, almost as if it had been waiting for me all along. It was a new beginning, one that stood as a testament to my resilience. It was the embodiment of everything I'd fought for, everything I'd lost, and everything I had rebuilt. The company was small at first, just me, Tommy, and a few good people I'd brought in. But it was steady. It grew. And with every new contract, I found myself moving further and further from the shadows of my past. 6 months after Melissa's conviction, I received a letter from her, delivered to my office one cold morning. She was in prison now, serving her time for her part in everything that had happened. The letter was filled with words of regret, apologies for the way things turned out, a plea for forgiveness. She wanted me to understand, to see her actions as a result of a misguided decision, and to let go of the anger that had driven me to expose everything. I held the letter in my hands, staring at it for a long time. I could feel the weight of those words, the desperation in her handwriting. She wanted a second chance, or at least some form of closure. Maybe she thought her words would carry weight, that I might feel some form of sympathy. But as I read through her letter, I realized that all the regret in the world wouldn't change what she had done to me. To us. I was done. I read the letter once, slowly, allowing myself to feel what little I could. Then, without hesitation, I threw it in the trash. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, not even with the best intentions. A few months later, I found myself in my new office one evening, reviewing contracts and planning the expansion of my business. Things were falling into place in a way I hadn't expected. My phone buzzed, and when I looked up, Tommy was standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "How does it feel?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How does what feel?" I replied, glancing up from my paperwork, half focused on him. "Winning. Getting your revenge. Watching the people who screwed you over get exactly what they deserved." Tommy's voice had that casual tone he always used, but there was something in his eyes, something that recognized the depth of what I'd been through and what I'd managed to accomplish. I paused, leaning back in my chair, staring out the window as I processed his question. I thought about it for a moment. The faces of the people who had conspired against me, Melissa, Ryan, Rachel, flashed before my eyes. Melissa was in prison, her career destroyed, her reputation in ruins. Ryan was in the middle of his own legal battles, likely never going to work in consulting again. Rachel had been convicted as a co-conspirator and was serving her own sentence, quietly serving her time for her part in it all. The three of them, once so confident in their manipulation and betrayal, were now facing the consequences of their actions. Their lives were in shambles, their futures were uncertain, their reputations permanently stained. They had underestimated me. They had thought they could get away with it, thought they could destroy my career and my life. And me? I was sitting here in my new office, successful, respected, financially secure, and completely free of the people who had betrayed me. No more lies, no more manipulation, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing they would never again have the power to hurt me. "It feels," I said finally, breaking the silence, "like justice." Tommy nodded, a slight grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Sometimes the system works, sometimes the good guys win, and the bad guys get what's coming to them." "Sometimes," I agreed, feeling a sense of finality in my words, "but only if the good guys are willing to fight for it." I looked out the window at the town of Millbrook, a town where everyone now knew the story of Ben Harper, the maintenance guy who had been betrayed by his wife and her criminal associates, but who had somehow managed to come out on top. They saw it as a story about loyalty, perseverance, and the triumph of a good man wronged. They thought it was a story of resilience, of a man who had faced the worst and come out the other side victorious. But what they didn't know, what none of them would ever understand, was how carefully I had orchestrated every move, how methodically I'd gathered evidence, how precisely I'd timed each revelation to maximize the damage to my enemies. They had no idea how many pieces I had moved behind the scenes, how I had manipulated the situation to ensure that my enemies were the ones who destroyed themselves, all while I remained the innocent victim in their eyes. And they never would, because the best revenge isn't just about destroying your enemies, it's about making them destroy themselves while you watch from the sidelines, looking like the wronged party. Melissa had taught me one thing. Loyalty was a one-way street in her world, and so I had built a new street with new rules. I made sure the traffic only flowed in my direction. My direction. The promotion that broke the camel's back had indeed changed everything, but not in the way any of us had expected. It wasn't just about the job, the money, or the power. It was about control. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine and making sure that no one ever took it from me again. I raised my glass of scotch, toasting silently to my ex-wife, now residing in a federal correctional facility 300 miles away. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction as I thought about her, locked away, paying for the mess she had made of her own life. "Thanks for the education, honey," I muttered aloud, a bitter smile playing on my lips. It was expensive, but worth every penny. Outside, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness, casting long shadows across the streets. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of lives being rebuilt, not just mine, but others too. Those who had fought their own battles and come out the other side. My life, my rules, my victory. I had earned every bit of it. And as the night settled in, I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Finally free from the past, finally living on my own terms. The future, whatever it held, was mine to shape. And for the first time, I had control.